Have you ever wondered what the entire lore of the wolf pack, the Quileute tribe in Twilight is? Well, I'm about to help you out. I've got too much free time on my hands, so I decided why not explain everything in a video. Now, I will be butchering these words. English is not my first language, it's not even my second language. I have tried to do so much research to be able to pronounce some of these words properly, and some of them I just cannot say them, so I genuinely really apologize. So I am going to be talking about the entire lore from the books, so not the real Quileute people, but just whatever they explain in the books, the lore imprinting how the gene works and some conspiracy theories. So if you've ever asked yourself who carries the gene, how did Leah phase, and anything about the Wolfpack members, this is your video. Now I will say, I am a big Twilight girl, okay? I will always like Twilight. I've liked Twilight since it came out and I've been obsessed. I've got multiple Twilight tattoos. Don't click off the video, but I am a Jacob girly. It is what it is. You know, you can't pick. If I could, maybe I would. So Twilight, and especially Jacob, was my hyperfixation for a very long time. So I'm really excited to just be yapping about this for a minute. But let's get started. So some of the facts about the Quileute tribe in the Twilight books, they're actually very intertwined with the reality of the real tribe and the real people. I will talk about the real people a bit more, but for now I'm just going to start with the story that is told in the books. So this is not reality, this is just the lore in the books. So they first settled in La Push and they were fishermen and shipbuilders. This was land, it is right next to the sea, and it was a really nice piece of land in a really nice location, so other people wanted this land as well, but they couldn't really defend themselves, so it got to a point that they just took their ships and tried to leave as people were invading them. Quileute had used the magic in his blood to defend his land, but they only returned in spirit, and he was now known as the first spirit chief. Now, the magic kind of works as like a form of astral projection where they leave their bodies. Bodies will stay with the women of the tribe, and the spirits could not physically touch the bodies of other men or the people that were invading them, but they could manipulate the elements and the animals. The people that were invading the tribe, they actually had a lot of dogs to help pull their sled. They actually used this to their advantage, and they not only manipulated the dogs, but they also took advantage from some bats that were in a cave. The survivors of the land, the people that were trying to invade them, were like, this place is cursed, so they just left. And the Hawes and the Maca tribe made treaties with the Quileutes, and then they returned to their land eventually. But long after the first spirit warrior passed, the last spirit chief was born in the 13th century, Taha Aki, and he's really important. So he married 3 times and he actually had 2 sons. He was known as a man very peaceful and very wise, but one of his companions, Utlapa, believed that Taha Aki wasn't good enough, so he wished to take over the tribe in the neighbouring lands. And one day Taha Aki was able to listen to his thoughts while they were in spirit form, and demanded that he leave their tribe and stop using the Quileute magic. But Taha Aki made the mistake of leaving his body in a cave while leaving the tribe in his spirit form, and then once he realised that Utlapa was following him, he had already taken over his body. So Utlapa, in spirit form, inside of Taha Aki, ruled the tribe for a while and just demanded privileges, but eventually Taha Aki entered the body of a wolf and convinced the pack that he was the true leader. And while he did so, Utlapa killed an elder of the tribe, and Taha Aki was so angry that he transformed into a human while he was inside the body of said wolf. And then while he was inside of the wolf, he actually realized that the wolf had a soul, so he told him that if he made room inside of him for his own soul and his spirit, that they could share their own physical form. So then he was able to control the body of the wolf and enter the body of the wolf in his spirit form as he pleased, so he became known as the Great Wolf. And then Taha Aki became conditionally immortal, and he lived around 2 centuries. His first 2 wives actually died of old age, and then eventually he imprinted on a woman, more on that later. He got married again and then decided to restrain himself from phasing in wolf form, which allowed him to continue to age and then grow up with his diet, eventually pass away. So they had a child together, Taha Aki and then his 3rd wife, and eventually a woman from the Maca tribe went missing. The tribe actually blamed the Quileute shapeshifters, but they weren't able to convince them that they hadn't harmed anyone. So Taha sent his eldest son to find what happened with the help of 5 other shapeshifters, and they followed an unfamiliar scent. Eventually that led them to the forest, and they discovered some blood. And immediately they knew they had found the culprit. So Tawi, who was Tahaaki's son, sent 2 wolves back to the village to report to the chief what they had found. But Tawi and the other 2 members never made it back to the tribe. There was no trace of them that was ever found, and Tahaaki was so heartbroken that they finally believed that they were not involved. But women from the Maka tribe kept disappearing, and they immediately notified the Quileutes, who found the same all-known scent all over the village, and they followed this scent once more, but only the eldest son of Tahaaki, Yahauta, returned this time. He was carrying like a cold stone body with him, and the body seemed to be of a man, but it was rock hard, solid. And the Maka girls, when they found their bodies, they were drained of their blood, and the other woman they discovered was having her blood drank by the man they had found with them. They eventually told the tribe how the man had attacked them once they found him, and he had bright red glowing eyes and his mouth was full of blood. He was extremely fast and strong. However, they realized that they could harm the man with their canine teeth, and the only way to kill him was to tear his head off. So the people of the tribe eventually started referring to this person as the Cold One. They burned the body, and Tahaaki kept a bag of his ashes that he would wear around his neck. But they found out eventually that the Cold One wasn't alone, and he had a mate, the Cold Woman. And when she found out that her partner had been killed, she went into the Quileute tribe, and driven mad by rage, she started slaughtering the people in the village. So Yahauta phased into a wolf, as he was the only remaining shapeshifter, but he was the only one that was actually fighting the woman, and he died. So filled with rage, his father phased into a wolf, fought the Cold Woman, but his wife knew that he was going to fail. They couldn't take her alone. So Tahaaki's wife took a knife, stabbed her heart, knowing the blood would distract the woman. Tahaaki was then able to kill her with the help of his younger sons, who were so distraught by the death of their mother that they had phased into wolves themselves, and phased in a very young age. After this, Tahaaki never phased back into his human form. He laid for 3 days beside the body of his wife and then went to the forest and never came back. After this, none of the descendants turned into wolves when they reached manhood. The wolves would only return when a Cold One was near. There were a lot of generations of Quileute men that actually didn't phase at all because they never came into contact with a Cold One, until a larger coven came into town during the 1930s, and 3 men phased. These 3 men were Ephraim Black, who took the roles of the Alpha, Levi Ule, and Quileute II. The Cold Ones were always enemies of the wolves, but when this coven came to live in Forks, they presented themselves as normal humans and they promised not to harm anyone. So they kind of just had to negotiate a treaty. As long as the Cold Ones never harmed a human, the shapeshifters wouldn't attack them or reveal their presence to humans. And then Ephraim realized the Cold Ones outnumbered them and they could have killed them if they pleased. So they knew that they truly wanted peace. After this coven, who made themselves known as the Cullens, left, no more vampires came into Forks. So Ephraim just lived his life as a human, grew old, started his own family. A couple more generations passed until the Cullens returned. So this story is great, but how does it all work? How does the gene actually work? So it is said that only the direct descendants of Tahaaki can actually pass on the gene and be shapeshifters, and they're actually born with 24 sets of chromosomes instead of 23. And it doesn't really affect them until they come across a Cold One, which is a vampire. This will be between early puberty to at most the age of 25, and that would trigger the gene. It's actually triggered by the smell, so they don't actually have to see the vampire, they just have to smell them. And they used to think it was only a trait passed down between the males of the family until Leah Clearwater passed. Now there are a couple of signs that point to someone that's going to phase or they're going to transform for the first time. So they'll first have a growth spurt, so in height and muscle. In females, it's not more building proper muscle, but it will be more muscle definition rather than a super spur of the moment spur growth. They will have a higher body temperature, so they'll be really warm to the touch. They'll have mood swings, experience a lot of rage, and they'll start to tremble before they actually phase for the first time. Once they actually start trembling, they can calm themselves down, but not in the younger wolves. So the younger ones are more inexperienced, the ones that are just phasing for the first time, or until they get to a couple of months of getting used to it, they cannot calm themselves down. So they get into a fit of rage, mood swing, they will just face. But eventually they can control it. They actually turn into wolves instantaneously. The clothes that they were wearing, they will shred. So they're completely destroyed. So the ones who actually can control their facing after a while of being wolves, they will start wearing like leather strays or like bags with them so they can actually tie their clothes before facing. So before we actually get into the appearance of the wolves and any more details on the actual wolves themselves, I want to talk about the families, how those turned into the wolf pack that we see in the films. So I've actually had, when I was rereading the books, I actually made like a family tree, and I did a bit of research to try to figure out, because a lot of the time some things were like, they didn't make sense, or I was like, who is this person? So it is a little bit complicated. I will try to insert pictures, because otherwise you might not get it. I will explain it like verbally, but just bear with me, okay? It might take a second. So we've got Ephraim Black. His grandfather was called Jacob Black Sr., and he married a woman named Alice Fox, and together they had 2 children called Joseph and Joanna. Joseph married Jane Clearwater, and they had Ephraim, who then had 3 children, Mary, Jane, and William Black Sr. William Black Sr. is Jacob's granddad. So William Black Sr. had 5 children, Emmy, Nora, Jenny, Connie, and Billy. Billy married Sarah Black, who was born Sarah Wilde, more on her later. Billy and Sarah had twin girls, Rachel and Rebecca, and then Jacob. But Billy's sister Connie married a guy named Kevin, and they had a child named Colin. Colin's also a shapeshifter in the books, in the same pack as Jacob. And this is where it gets a bit interesting. So you see, we don't actually know that much about Kevin. We don't know who his ancestors are, and this would actually be a key to know if women can pass the gene, because it is widely believed that it can only be passed down from father to sons. But if Kevin's simply a human, that would mean that Connie had inherited the gene and passed it down. Billy never shifted, as there were 2 generations between Ephraim and Jacob, so the Cullens arriving in the 30s and then the Cullens coming back to Forks, so there were no vampires around it. There is a chance that if some vampires had come into town at that point, that Billy's sister would have also faced, just like Leah did, but she would have had to have the gene. So do women have it or not? I think they do. So do you remember I was talking about Joanna Black? So Ephraim's aunt, she married another random man, and they had 2 children, one of whom was the great-grandmother of Jared Cameron. So we actually don't know who his mother or his grandmother married, but here are my thoughts. So all of these people are connected, right? And the thing is, they're all married to random people from nearby tribes or even the same tribe. However, one thing that I had noticed is that when one of these, the people in the Quileute tribe, when they marry someone else from the Quileute tribe, then those people do get a name in the books or in the illustrated guide. But if they marry someone that's not from the tribe, they don't usually get named. So I'm assuming that when I'm saying, oh, they just married like a random man or a random woman, that means it's someone from a different tribe. Which would also help with the theory that the woman can actually pass down the gene, because a lot of the time it is person from tribe marries someone from random place that we don't know about, and then the child has the gene. So, so this would have meant that Joanna passed the gene down to Lorraine, who passed it to her children, who passed it to their children, who passed it down to Jared, who was born in the same year as Jacob, just for reference. So Quileute the first married Ole Akiha, and they had 2 children, Amelia and Quill the second. So Quill the second is the one that was on the tribe we run about with Ephraim, and he married a girl called Lucy Fox, and they had Quill the third and another child called Doris. Now Doris married Hank Wilde, and they have, you put 2 and 2 together, same last name. So Doris and Hank had Sarah Wilde, later became Sarah Black, Jacob's mom. And they also have Quill the third, who married Molly Swan. Couldn't find any relation to our swans like Bella, but why would they give them the same last name? I don't know. And then they have Quill the fourth, who married Joy, and together they have Quill the fifth. So Quill the third is Sarah Black's uncle, and Quill the fourth, which is Quill the fifth's father, is Sarah's cousin. So Jacob is second cousins with Quill the fifth, as they share great-grandparents. So speaking of the great-grandparents, do you remember Quill the second sister Amelia? Yeah, she married a guy called Edmund Clearwater, who had 3 children. Daniel, who's not relevant, we don't care about him. A guy named Peter, who married Julia Littlesea, and together they had Harry Clearwater. And then Lucy Clearwater had a child, who was Brady Fuller. Again, we don't know who Lucy Clearwater married or who her children married, but she could have been carrying the gene. So Sarah Black and Harry Clearwater are second cousins once removed. But it gets more complicated because the Oley family, girl. So Thomas Oley the first married a woman called Beatrice Dorr, and together they had 3 children, Ruth, Caleb, and Levi. So Ruth married Jean, and they have a child who has a child, and then that child is the father of Paul. And then Ruth is the great-grandmother of Paul. Paul was also born the same year as Jacob. God, there was a lot of kids born that year in that tribe. Then Caleb married Alice, and they have a child called Mirabel, and they have Jonathan. So Jonathan Oley has 2 children, Lucas and Sue. Sue married Harry Clearwater. And then they have 2 children, Leah and Seth Clearwater. And then that means that they are related to Jacob, as their parents are second cousins once removed. And then the first of Thomas the first child and Ruth's child is Levi Oley, who was in the pack with Ephraim and Quill II. Now, Levi married a woman called Eileen Longtree, and they had 2 children, Charles and Douglas. Charles married a woman called Clara, and they had 3 children, Thomas II, Ellen, and Joshua Oley, who married Alison, and then they had Sam Oley. So Sam and Paul are actually third cousins once removed. But it gets even more intertwined because then Paul imprints on Rachel Black, one of Jacob's sisters, making them brother-in-law, so they're all related, which, okay, part. So Sam married Emily Young, and just like I said, she is Seth and Leah's second cousin from a different tribe, and she is Claire's aunt, who Quill V imprints on. So Emily and Claire are part of the Maca tribe, the same tribe that I was on about with the cold ones. They attacked the girls with the original pack. So right now you might be wondering, right, so you've spoken about every other character in the Twilight series except for Embry. Who are Embry's parents? Who are his relatives? Where does he get the gene from? And the thing is, we don't know. Now, we've got some theories, but we don't actually know for a fact who it is. So we know his mum's name's Tiffany, and she comes from the Maca tribe. However, it's only the Quileutes that have the gene, not anyone that we know of from the Maca tribe. So who is his dad? It had to be someone from the Quileute tribe, right? So in the books, Edward actually says that these 3 are the most likely candidates, being Quill IV, Billy Black, so Jacob's dad, and Joshua Oley. Now, here's where it gets tricky. They were all married at the time that Embry was born and would have been conceived. So he was born in the year 1990, okay? But there is other people, now that we've explained the family tree, that it could have been like Thomas Oley II, which is Joshua's brother. Sue also has a brother called Lucas. This is one of the moments where we really need to think about who carries the gene. Can women carry the gene? Because, for example, if Jared got his gene from his dad, then he could potentially also be Embry's dad. So let's just look at the facts and just see who the most likely candidate is, shall we? So we'll start with Billy Black, and he is Jacob's dad. His full name is William Black Jr. He was born around the 1950s in La Push. He was a conversion fisherman before he became wheelchair-bound due to diabetes and some nerve damage. As a teenager, he used to hope that he would come in contact with vampires because he really wanted to trigger his gene, and it wasn't until Jacob was born that he just wished that vampires wouldn't come to Forks at all. Now, the thing that we know from the books is that when the issue of who's Embry's dad comes into play, Jacob doesn't know one to talk about Billy about it. So there is a chance there that he thinks his dad might also be Embry's dad. Because for Embry to be Billy's son, he would have had to be conceived at the same time that Sarah was pregnant with Jacob, because they were born around the same time. They were both born the same year. So people have theorized that maybe he felt a lot of pressure around that time because he had twin daughters. Now he was going to have another son, and it was a growing family. They were really poor. So maybe people think that because of the pressure that Billy might have felt, he went on to cheat on Sarah. But that, just to me, that doesn't sound like Billy. Doesn't sound like something that he would do. He could also have owned up to it after Sarah's death. I mean, I understand that maybe after your wife has died, you don't want to go around being like, by the way, I cheated on her. But at this rate, when the Twilight series actually happened, Sarah's been dead for a very long time. So he, at one point, he could have said something, you know, especially after Embry faced and everyone was like, whoa, we didn't know he had the gene. Now, another suspect that people don't usually consider a suspect or someone that could be Embry's dad because they don't think he has the gene, but I think he does, is Harry Clearwater, so Seth and Leah's dad. Now, I think he gets the gene from his dad, who gets it from his mother, who's Amelia Tara, who's Quileute Tara's the second sister. Now, we know the woman can get the gene at this point, because Leah has it, Colin gets it from his mother, Connie, and Jared gets it from his great-grandmother. But the thing is, Leah, so Harry's daughter, is the one who brings up the Embry situation, knowing that no one in the pack wanted to talk about it. So she probably doesn't think it was her dad. Like, I doubt that she would go around saying, like, oh my god, Embry, who's your daddy, knowing that it's also her daddy. You know what I mean? But unlike Billy, he wouldn't have had that much of a chance to come clear because his wife is very much alive and they're very much in love until he passes away. But that's another story. And the thing is, speaking of his wife, part of Sue Clearwater's family lived in the Maca tribe. That's where Tiffany, so Embry's mum's from. Because we know that Emily and Claire are relatives of Sue and they are from that tribe. They're cousins with Leah and Seth. So that links Harry to the tribe that they're from. But the thing is that after Embry's born, Tiffany moves to La Push. Why didn't she then say anything about who the father of her child is? She could have said something, you know, but perhaps she didn't want to ruin a marriage. Maybe she just went to La Push. She saw that Harry and Sue were happily married and she was like, I don't want anything to do with this. Embry would have been conceived around the time where Leah was 3 years old and 3 years before Seth was born. And the thing is, Harry doesn't really seem shocked when Embry joins the pack, but we also don't really hear that much about it either. So it's like, are you shocked because he's your son? Or are you just like, meh, another one, thank you. There is people saying that Harry's not carrying the gene and that Seth and Leah get it from Sue being Thomas Ully the first great-granddaughter, but if she can get the gene, being a woman and passing it down to her kids, then Harry could have been from being Amelia Tara's grandson, who's a sister of Quill II, who was a shapeshifter. Our third suspect in this paternity court is Joshua Ully. Now, in the Twilight Illustrated Guide, they put Embry on the same page as the rest of the Ully family tree. We know that he abandoned his wife and kids when Sam was very young. We don't know the exact age. So we know that Sam was around 4 years old when Embry was born, so it is possible that it was the affair that led Joshua to leave his wife, or he left his wife and very shortly after Embry was conceived. Now, so we know, we've gathered from context clues that he was in the family type, so maybe Tiffany went to La Push to tell Joshua that she was pregnant. He realised his mistakes and he just packed his bags and left. And maybe she didn't want Alison Ully to be even more heartbroken. Her husband just left her with a 4-year-old child. She didn't want to go in and be like, hey, by the way, he also cheated on you with me and I'm pregnant. So, you know, and obviously Tiffany didn't know about shapeshifters, so she didn't know that Embry and Sam would eventually become friends and members of the same pack. But then why would Tiffany stay in La Push if Joshua is gone and she doesn't really know anyone else in the tribe? That's my reason to believe that it's not Joshua, even though a lot of people seem to think that he really is. But she's got no one in La Push and she's got everyone and her family members in the Maca tribe, so why would she stay after her baby daddy has left? Now, our fourth suspect is Quileute IV. So he would have been a newlywed when he had the affair, or maybe it was a one-night stand very quickly before he got married, but very soon after Quill V was conceived. And perhaps Tiffany, she went to La Push to tell him about the pregnancy, only to see that he's happily married with another kid on the way. So here's my theory. I think because Quill IV is direct descendant of Quill II, without any siblings or other relatives except for Sarah Black, he could have inherited a bunch of land that he offered Tiffany to live in order for her to stay quiet, or like as a form of child support. And we know that Quill and Embry are extremely close. They're the same height, so maybe they have a brotherly bond, if that's even a thing. Some people have speculated about Quileute III being the dad, but there would have been a 30-year age gap if we assume that Tiffany's the same age as like Sarah and Sue, so I don't want to think that this is the case, okay? But then if it is Quileute III, his only son died, so why wouldn't he claim his only living child? So unfortunately for us, we don't actually have an answer for this. So Stephanie Meyer said, I haven't explored the 3 main options for Embry's father this deeply yet. Someday, if it becomes necessary to a story, I'll come through each character, look at his history and his present, and see which option makes the most sense. So basically, Stephanie Meyer was like, yeah, I don't know. And also, unfortunately for us, this is very common with her in her writing and lore world building, so it is what it is, you know. So let's talk about our pack, the Ully pack, or the pack in the Twilight books. So this is first formed when Sam Ully turns into a wolf, followed by Paul, Jared, Embry, and then Jacob. Later on expanding with Leah and Seth Clearwater, Quill V, Brady Fuller, and Colin Littlesey, although we don't see Brady and Colin in the films. And there are other unnamed pack members that join at the end of Breaking Dawn that we also don't hear much about. And then we have a second pack that we call the Black Pack, which is formed when Sam plans to kill Bella and Renesmee, and Jacob embraces for the first time his inheritance as an alpha and being the great-grandson of Ephraim Black, a position that he before that had shown no intention of claiming, but he felt like he had no choice. This also gives him alpha voice, which basically allows him to create orders that the pack members have to follow. This is really helpful when they're in a fight, as it eliminates the delay of decision making as a group. They have to do what the alpha says against their will. The alpha holds control over the members of the pack and has all the responsibilities. And then they have a beta, which is the second in command, which in Jacob's pack is Leah, and she would be the alpha of the pack if Jacob wasn't able to be. And the thing about these wolves is that when Bella first sees them, she thinks that they're wolves at first, like everyone else in Forks. And this is due mostly for the size. I would describe them myself, but I'm just gonna let Bella do the talking for this one. It was enormous, as tall as a horse but thicker, much more muscular. The long muzzle grimaced, revealing a line of dagger-like incisors. A grisly snarl rolled out from between the teeth, rumbling across the clearing like a prolonged crack of thunder. The bear, only it wasn't a bear at all. Still, this gigantic black monster had to be the creature causing all the alarm. From a distance, anyone would assume it was a bear. What else could it be so vast, so powerfully built? I wished I were lucky enough to see it from a distance. Instead, it padded silently through the grass a mere 10 feet from where I stood. "Don't move an inch," Edward's voice whispered. I stared at the monstrous creature, my mind boggling as I tried to put a name to it. There was a distinctly canine cast to the shape of it, the way it moved. I could only think of one possibility, locked in horror as I was. Yet I never imagined that a wolf could get so big. So in the books, Bella remarks that Jacob's muscles had grown a considerable amount since phasing. His veins and tendons were more prominent and visible, and that the features of his face had also hardened, and that at one point she says that the rest of the pack and him could all be siblings because they start to look very similar after phasing. So as a human, Jacob's meant to be 6'7", and as a wolf, he's meant to be 10 feet tall. And each of the wolves has different colored hair. So for example, Jacob has russet brown fur and dark eyes, while he used to be the second fastest and the second largest. He eventually did become the biggest and the strongest, but Leah was still a little bit faster than him. And even in the human form, they're meant to be like faster than the average human. Our pack believe that their fur color actually reflects themselves, and even joke about it at some point, saying that Sam's black fur is because he has a black heart, and that Quill's fur reflects that he is sweet like chocolate, and he really is, my poor baby. And in Eclipse, Bella asked Jacob what his fur is longer than the rest of the wolves, and he says that it's because his hair as a human is the longest, and then they explain that the length of the hair correlates to the length of the fur, so that's why they have to cut it after they phase. Their sense of smell, even as humans, is amplified to detect enemies, and they can smell vampires from miles away. Their vision's meant to be 10 times sharper than humans, and the pack can hear each other's thoughts in wolf form, and they can heal wounds faster than any human, and they are canonically faster than vampires. And we are getting to that part of the video that I was a bit dreading to talk about. Imprinting. It's not like love at first sight, really. It's more like gravity moves suddenly. It's not the earth holding you anymore. She does. You become whatever she needs you to be, whether that's a protector, a lover, or a friend. So, imprinting is an involuntary process in which the Quileute men, anytime after their phasing, find their soulmate, right? And during this time, they become united with a really strong bond for the rest of their lives. They describe it as a feeling of nothing else in this world matters, and the only desire is to protect the person that they have imprinted on. And a wolf can imprint on anyone. It doesn't matter if they have previous feelings from someone else. See Sam Ollie, and it cannot be forced like Jacob tried to forcefully imprint on Bella. So we don't necessarily know if someone imprints of you, if you can reject them, but we can assume that would never happen. First of all, because we've never seen it. Second of all, they are meant to be perfect for each other. They're meant to be soulmates. They are supposed to have a choice, but they have never actually rejected the wolf, so we wouldn't know. Sam Ollie actually believes that imprinting occurs as a way to find the best person to reproduce with and make more wolfy puppies, but Jacob and Renesmee wouldn't be able to have children that we know of, so... And Billy Black, on the other hand, thinks that it's actually meant to make the shapeshifter stronger. And because the only female shapeshifter that we know is Leah, we don't know how imprinting it works when it's not a man imprinting on a woman. Where's the gay representation? Whatever, we don't talk about that. And Sam Ollie imprinted on Emily Young even though he was dating Leah at the time. She didn't know about the wolves. He obviously couldn't explain imprinting to her while they were dating, so he was forced to keep the reason for their breakup a secret. We know that Sam still cares for Leah very deeply, but the imprinting bond with Emily is stronger than that. When Leah leaves his pack and then joins Jacob. He's deeply hurt and even calls her Lily at one point, the nickname that he had for her when they were dating. And that is so cute. And the thing is, Emily didn't fall in love with Sam immediately. When he imprinted on her, she was not happy, as she should be, because all of a sudden his cousin's ex-boyfriend was into her, but eventually they do fall in love and they even get engaged. Now, Paul imprints on Rachel, who's Jacob's sister, at some point between Eclipse and Breaking Dawn when she visits her family after graduating from college. Rachel gives him a chance and Paul hopes to gain more self-control in hopes of one day being able to elope with her. Paul is known to be a little volatile. He tends to have a bit of angry outbursts, which were only amplified after facing for the first time, but his love for Rachel made him want to change. Jared is the second one to face after Sam. When he was in high school, he used to sit next to a girl named Kim who had a massive crush on him, but he never really paid any attention to her. And then when he went back to class after facing for the first time, he imprinted on her, even though he had never paid attention to her, barely even talked to her before that. I feel like Jared's imprinting is the best case scenario and the only one that I'm kind of okay with, as he imprinted on a girl that was his age and that already had feelings for him, you know? But if you think the Jacob and Renesmee situation's fucked up, Quileute is actually the first one to imprint on a child. He imprints on Emily's niece, Claire. Emily and Bella are the only ones that seem to be shocked by this, even though the men in the tribe keep telling them there's no romantic feelings involved. But it is weird. Quill is very protective of Claire and she sees him as an older brother, and she does get very upset when he's not around or when other members of the pack raise their voice at him. And about this, Jacob said, "Quill will be the best, kindest big brother any kid ever had. There isn't a toddler on the planet that will be more carefully looked after than the little girl will be. And then when she's older and needs a friend, he'll be more understanding, trustworthy and reliable than anyone else she knows. And then when she's grown, they'll be as happily as Emily and Sam." It's giving grooming. Like, come on, I can't defend this. And then Jacob imprints on Renesmee, who's a newborn baby. While Bella was pregnant, he was repulsed by it. He was like, "You're carrying a monster, I don't want anything to do with it." But then he becomes slowly more overprotective of Bella and never wanted to leave her side. When she gives birth to the baby, Jacob thought Bella had died, so he went in to kill the monster, being Renesmee, and as he looked into her eyes for the first time, he imprinted. Now, the reasoning behind this, apparently, allegedly, according to Stephanie Meyer, imprinting on Renesmee allowed Jacob to get rid of his sadness and his will to live the rest of his life in wolf form, and gave his life a new meaning and something to fight for. And moreover, by imprinting on Renesmee, she is granted protection from the pack, as they purposely wanted to kill her, so now there had to be peace between the vampires and the werewolves. But the explanation does not make that any better. I think, personally, that she did the whole Quill and Claire storyline to kind of test the waters and be like, "Hey guys, look, it can happen and it's not weird at all," and to give out a bit of an explanation before the Jacob and Renesmee thing. It's still weird. We still don't like it. So far, the only members of the pack that haven't imprinted are Embry, Seth, and Leah. Seth is just a child, so again, just let him be. Leah is a woman, and apparently in this book, women can never be happy. See my girl Rosalie. I would love to have seen Embry imprinting on Angela. I think that would have been a great story for a different book. Stephanie Meyer, hit me up. I've got ideas. So here's the thing. I have been calling them wolves or werewolves for the entirety of this video, but did you know they're not actually werewolves? So in the lore of the Twilight Saga, there are two different types that we know as werewolves. So the Quileute wolves, which we're speaking about, and the Children of the Moon. The Children of the Moon are more like the traditional werewolves that we know, so they change only at night during the full moon, and they can only pass down their traits on bites, not genetics. So in their form, they don't actually look like wolves. They're more like a humanoid form, like with strong forelegs, and they have usable hands. They almost stand up like upright. In their wolf form, they actually are not aware of their human version. They don't have a sense of reason, and they're meant to be wild and ferocious. They don't have packs, so they either sit alone or with a wolf of the opposite gender. They cannot breed, so they can only bat a human to transform, and if they have kids, they won't inherit the wolf trait. Some of their traits are also that they have really high speed and strength, they cannot be killed with a silver bullet, and they can kill vampires and are immune to vampire venom. Because of the Children of the Moon and the vampires are natural enemies, the vampires have killed the wolves into almost extinction. Before I end this, I do want to talk about the fact that sometimes we forget that these are real people. So the Quileute tribe, there are actual people, they're real people. Stephanie Meyer basically stole their culture. They have a very rich cultural heritage and rooted in oral tradition. They are working very hard to preserve their language and their culture, and this is something that has been affected by Twilight. Stephanie Meyer did not make everything up. They do believe that they were transformed from wolves into humans by the creator, which is a very important part of their spiritual and cultural identity. Historically, they were very skilled people, but it wasn't until the arrival of the European settlers in the 19th century that brought disease, displacement, and forced assimilation of their culture. Today, the Quileute Reservation is located in La Push, Washington, and the tribe just continues to fight for their land rights and their cultural preservation. But the Twilight saga has had, unfortunately, a very negative impact on them. Stephanie Meyer fictionalized and profited of real people with real culture and a rich history. While the books, yeah, they did bring a bit of attention to La Push, their representation caused a lot of problems for them. First of all, starting with the cultural appropriation. They used real names and traditions, but they misrepresented them beyond recognition for the Quileute people. It reinforced harmful stereotypes of indigenous people as supernatural beings rather than real modern communities that they are. And they exploited this culture without giving them any compensation. So the Twilight franchise made billions in books and movie sales, and the Quileute people received no financial benefit from them. So not only was their culture being used as a plot device, they didn't get any money from it, and then you have a bunch of people going to their land just for entertainment because they're fans of the series, disrespecting sacred sites and their secret traditions. They were not consulted for their portrayal in the films, and the franchise basically just reinforced Hollywood's long history of stereotyping indigenous people. And more importantly, the main character, the actor, is not even indigenous to begin with. But all in all, this was the history of the Twilight Wolf Pack. And if you think this was weird, the vampires get worse.